Sorry about that, babe.
Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I have a ton to say about Parasite Eve, but it is a game that's been on my radar for quite some time. I knew about it as a kid, obviously I never owned it. I really wasn't in the business of renting RPGs either, you know what I mean, because they could be pretty long. But Parasite Eve has been talked about in my community, tossed around in my head for a while as far as like, oh, I gotta get to it someday, and guess what? Finally, I decided it's probably a good time to play it because, as you can see from my shirt, we're right around Christmas time. By the time this review comes out, it's probably going to be after Christmas, but it's alright. So I knew that Parasite Eve was a blend of RPG and survival horror. I kind of figured, well, that's going to be right up my alley. And I'm going to give a specific shout out here to a very, very prominent member of our community and good friend, Schmidt Wild, who I will link his stuff in the pinned comment description below. You can check him out. But I know that this is one of his favorite games, so hope you enjoyed my playthrough, Schmidt, and yeah, let's get the review started. Parasite Eve is an action role-playing game with survival horror elements and was developed and published by Squaresoft, released in North America on September 9th of 1998. The video game is actually a sequel to a Japanese science fiction horror novel titled Parasite Eve, and this is the first game in the series. In Parasite Eve, you take control of Aya Brea, an NYPD rookie who is attending an opera at Carnegie Hall with a date on Christmas Eve of 1997. See? It's a Christmas game. Anyways, during the opera performance, everyone in the building spontaneously combusts into flames except for Aya, her date, and the actress on stage who goes by the name of Melissa Pierce. Aya then confronts Melissa Pierce on the stage, to which she is told that her mitochondria needs more time to develop. Parasite Eve is a truly wacky story with lots of science and pseudo-body horror / transformations, and this is a story that's better left for you to experience for yourself. So without rambling on in some sort of cryptic fashion, I'll just say it's worth your while. So essentially, as mentioned earlier, Parasite Eve is the love child of an action RPG and a survival horror game. While in-game you have relative free reign to roam and explore within your designated area that you were already in, or the area that you chose from on the world map section. There's lots of items and goodies that are hidden from sight or slightly obscured, so exploration is welcome. Throughout your exploring, you'll have areas that have a chance of random encounters similar to most RPGs. Basically, there are designated hotspots, and sometimes you get into a battle and sometimes you won't. During the battle, you control Aya and are able to move around, dodge, and position yourself to properly attack enemies. It's an active battle system, obviously with it being an action RPG, and once your time bar fills up, you can then choose your next move. Whether it be attacking an enemy, attacking multiple enemies, using parasite energy, which are basically magic spells, using items like healing medicines, changing your weapons or armor, or escaping the battle entirely. The attacking phase consists of the game briefly pausing, choosing your enemies to target within a dome-like structure, and if the enemies are within the dome, you'll be able to attack them, and if they're outside, the enemies are kind of out of your weapon's range. Speaking of weapon range, clearly it differs. For example, the SMGs and shotguns have shorter range than rifles. The aforementioned parasite energy recharges during battle as well, similar to your action meter refilling. But the more that you use the parasite energy in battle, the slower it then refills. So that means if you run into a rough boss fight and you use a lot of parasite energy, basically at some point it won't even refill anymore. Or at least it seemed that way for me when I needed it the most. A pretty cool and unique part of the game revolves around weapon and armor alteration. Essentially, you could swap weapon and armor skills by use of the tools and super tools by way of the tune-up option on your menu. The act of swapping a skill to another weapon will get rid of the weapon entirely that you took the skill from, so make sure that you're ready to say goodbye before doing so. These skills include various things such as different bullets that can cause status effects, adding inventory space, attacking first, and so on. It lends itself pretty well to some cool customization and critical thinking. Also, if your weapon of choice doesn't have any slots to add skills and enhancements to, don't fret. The trading card system that exists within the game allows you to add new slots through Wayne, who takes over the weapons room in the middle of the game back at the NYPD. And you could probably assume, since it's an RPG, experience points are given after defeating your foes. These allow for Aya's attributes to go up via leveling. But there's also bonus points that are given upon battle completions, which I didn't realize until the end of the game because I'm an idiot. These bonus points can be used to raise your active time bar recovery, item capacity, or the attributes of a weapon or armor. I found myself doing a massive stats dump into my mid/late game shotgun attack power, and I just rolled with that. But had I really realized what was going on with the bonus point system earlier, things could have looked a little bit different for me in various areas, but you know what, first time playthrough, am I right? I'd also be remiss if I did not mention that there is a New Game Plus mode titled EX Game, where the main draw consists of the Chrysler Building, a 77-floor post-game dungeon featuring tons of challenges and a final boss battle. As of the time of me writing this, I just got started with my long play of this, and I also didn't realize that your level resets to 1, so I'd probably recommend that you play through a bit of the game and or do some grinding to get those levels up before you go through the Chrysler Building, because it can be pretty tough. Alright, now on to the technical breakdown of Parasite Eve. Graphically, this title is more than satisfactory, especially given its era. I always feel like I need to have the disclaimer during the PS1/Saturn N64 era with it not aging particularly well, but in this case I felt like the game looked good. The environments were engrossing, the character models were recognizable, the battling animations were fluid, and I really enjoyed the majority of the CGI cutscenes. I will say though that despite the interesting camera angles in the game, sometimes they could be a bit misleading when coupled with the graphics in regards to dead ends, and items that are quite hidden mostly due to the graphic quality itself. Music and sound. I really enjoyed the soundtrack to Parasite Eve. It reminded me of the late 90s, lots of ambient tracks, and at times reminding me of a more, upbeat Silent Hill/Matrix crossover. The sound effects were also decent enough and nothing really for me to complain about on this front. It's solid. Controls. I found the controls of Parasite Eve to be pretty easy to get the hang of. The movement is fluid. The in-combat movement is smooth, and controlling the main map screen is clean as well. The menuing in Parasite Eve is fairly intricate, and I would dub it as decent. It could certainly get a bit clunky at times, but I've seen way worse. One thing that I did have a bit of trouble with, and I would deem it as a negative, is that sometimes it's tricky when searching for items. General action detection on phones, searching for and trying to open doors, finding hidden items, and so forth. It can certainly be clunky, hard to figure out where you are or where to click, and generally it's a pain. Honestly, this is one of my biggest gripes of the game for sure. Gameplay and fun factor. Parasite Eve is a fun game. The combat is engaging. I really enjoyed the mix of action and turn-based battle. Sort of reminds me of a mix of Baldur's Gate and games like Fallout 3 with the targeting and pause-style combat. There are lots of great dialogue and story progression scenes littered throughout to carry you along the journey, and there is a fair amount of challenge, particularly in the last third or fourth of the game. Coupled with the somewhat clunky menuing, the inventory management can get plugged up and cumbersome as well. Luckily, you can drop or store items in a chest similar to Resident Evil, but I felt like at times the inventory management was mildly annoying, but hey, it's basically a survival horror game, right? So I get it. A few fairly annoying things revolve around the late game in particular. There will be some tough boss battles, and guess what? If you die, you have to go through the longer cutscenes and dialogue just to get back and try again. This is something that I feel plagues this era of gaming in general. The cutscenes and the dialogue are great, but seeing them for a second, third, or God forbid a fourth time, it just gets annoying. I really wish you could skip them. Another instance of this is a late game chase sequence. Basically, if you take too long or make a wrong move, you will have to redo and rewatch a bunch of crap. And yes, this happened to me once, mostly because I made a big error, but still in the end I was annoyed. I'm sure you can gather based off of this review so far that the good far outweighs the bad. Parasite Eve is essentially a hidden gem amongst the PS1 RPG lineup. Sure, it is fairly well known, but how often is it really talked about, especially when compared to other games on the console? Games like Final Fantasy VII, 8, 9, Final Fantasy Tactics, Suikoden, Xenogears, and even remakes like Lunar the Silver Star Story Complete. I found Parasite Eve to be a wonderful blend of genres, challenging enough with an engaging story, an adequate length, and even a New Game Plus mode for those that aspire for more. I always had a feeling that I would enjoy this game when I finally got around to it, and by golly, I enjoyed it. It's a Christmas miracle. I give Parasite Eve on the PS1 a 9 out of 10. This was up there with other favorite games that I played in 2022 such as Elden Ring and Sweet Home. I highly recommend that if you are a fan of RPGs and horror games that you give this one a try. And if you've already played it before, why not do it again? Parasite Eve, in my opinion, is a masterclass in genre blurring and engagement. If you've enjoyed this review, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing if you haven't already. And if you're interested in more Parasite Eve content, don't forget to check out my Let's Play, which is actually just one super long video. I'll leave that in the pinned comment description below. And stay tuned for hopefully in the near future a long play of the EX game mode completing the Chrysler building. Take care and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, all that good stuff.